name is Gina Caruso, and this is the closing night of the 5th annual Honolulu Surf Film Festival. It's a wonderful evening. We're really excited to be here. And I want to introduce Abby Algar, who's going to be programming the Surf Film Festival, the 6th annual Honolulu Surf Film Festival next year. Abby.
Hi, my name's Abby Algar. Welcome to the closing night of our 5th annual Honolulu Surf Film Festival. We're showing Going Surfing tonight. We're really excited, and I hope to see you all back here for the 6th annual next year.
It was at Big Sunset. Filming a surfer on a 20-foot wave, he got sucked over the falls and was rolled all the way into the beach. So disoriented, he went back to Billy Barnfield's house where he was staying to sit out the rest of the day. He felt so ill that he decided to go to Peter Cole's doctor, where he discovered that this wipeout had caused him a heart murmur. That heart murmur stayed with him for 5 years, but you know, he still thought it was worth it. The heart murmur that he got was the surfer who rode that hell of a wave that caused it, Reno Abellira. This surfer and friend was filmed by Bud throughout the 60s at iconic Waimea and Sunset. He possessed stoke tempered with the clean style of big wave riding, and I believe that the one film grab Bud thought was a huge favorite, so much so that he created it several times for his private collection and used it many times for his surf posters, caused him great joy to the very end of his days. Some know him as Doctor, but those that love him call him Ricky Grigg. Bud Browne has often been described as a reticent and reserved individual. But when I see how he captured this particular surfer, I am reminded that I must teach all of you, in truth, he could be romantic with a soulful eye. This surfer is a gentleman and a true friend to many of surfing's finest. He's poetic, funny, and I love to hear the sound of his name, Kimo Hollinger. There are some friendships that go the distance. This one was truly that for Bud. Whoops. He valued and treasured their friendship in the highest way, and I believe the feeling is mutual. I knew Bud Browne very well, and this one was at the top of his list. It would bring great joy to Bud simply by mentioning his name, and it gives me great joy to say it again, Peter Cole. And tonight we have among us another guest that I was pleasantly surprised to see him walk in the door. And I do want to introduce him and bring him up if he doesn't mind, because this was a very special person to Bud as well, and my father. And as a little girl, I remember visiting Bud at his house, and one of my favorite pictures of Bud was taken by Ron Church in the doorway at his house, and that's Mr. Jock Sutherland. And I want to turn it over to the special guests, and maybe they can share a few words about the great man. We'll start with Reno.
I hope you notice that a lot of the film work in the movie was a major portion of that were water shots, early water shots. And the thing that always amazed me was Bud Browne's work ethic. I mean, he would always be checking the surf throughout most of the 70s during the highlights of my career. He was prepping to check the surf, and if he wasn't on the land behind the lens of a tripod, he was in the water. I mean, the guy was really a waterman. He was amazing. I don't know what age he was, but I'm sure he was well into his 60s. He was incredibly in good shape, and he's out there with his camera, lugging it through the shore break, through the rip, out there in the water, and he'd always be, he would be one of those guys that you'd have to look out for, because you didn't want to hit him with that heavy-duty plexiglass water housing, and he was just, he put himself in harm's way. I didn't tell him to go out there and film me at sunset. I'm not going to take the hit for that one. When Anna told me that story, I felt even sadder, because I really miss Bud. the guy was so, clearly dedicated to his craft. And but what was so amazing, he was practically had no ego. I mean, you could talk to him, he was very quiet, but he was kind of, very introverted. It was like painfully shy. I mean, I might have had, maybe a handful of conversations where we actually passed sentences back and forth, but he seemed, very kind of, I don't mean he was out there, I just mean he was very into his craft, very into himself, and he was a man of few words. And, I remember as a kid, as a high school kid, looking at the early surf movie posters that would come out, and most of them, Surfing Holidays, had some amazing, scary looking shots. When I was a kid trying to learn how to ride bigger waves with some of these guys who are my heroes, I was well behind them in getting past the fear, but some of the movies that Bud Browne came out, he was really, literally a pioneer of motion picture, water action shots for surfing. And I think that's what we should always remember him for, that he really pioneered the, true to life, right there in your face action water shot. And I think if like most of the stuff at Pipeline, that was him in the water. And at places like Waimea, I don't even remember him out in Waimea, but some of those water shots that he had, the bigger days at Waimea were him in the water. So that to this day still amazes me. Anyway.
What struck me was how lucky all of us are up here. And of course, some of you out there are old enough to be in the same lineup with us when we were all on the North Shore in the 50s, 60s, and actually most of the film was in the 70s, which was his last film. But I thought, in fact, I jotted down a couple of thoughts about Bud Browne so I wouldn't forget exactly my impressions. But I thought I'd tell you what it was like at the very beginning. Bud, of course, is notoriously known for the simplicity that he loved. He lived his life as simple as you can actually make it. Take his dietary habits, 1 meal a day, he's known for that. He was as slim and sleek to prove it. In fact, they named him Barracuda. He was truly a remarkable person. He was so conservative, almost to a point of being shy, like Reno said. To me, though, it was not so much shyness as he was just polite. Bud Browne was really a nice guy. He was really a nice man. And of course, life in the 50s and 60s was a lot simpler today than today. There were very few contests, there was no crowds. I mean, we'd pal out at Waimea with 3 guys or 6 guys. 10 guys was an absolute crowd. Can you believe that? I mean, it was just unbelievable. And Bud was there to record it all. And the 2 or 3 things I like to say about him is at first I think, well, surfing goes back, certainly 100, if not many hundreds of years, certainly to Duke, Kahanamoko, and the Beach Boys and Waikiki and all of that. What I see about the 50s and 60s that Bud did, he recorded what I think is the beginning in 2 important ways. It was the beginning of a time when surfers rode for the first time truly big surf, at Makaha first, and then on the North Shore. And secondly, it was a time, especially the 50s, when surfing actually hit the world as a fad. It took off. It was exponentially growing ever since. And up until that time, it hadn't really dawned on the world how great a sport it was. So Bud was there to record these 2 incredibly important decades, the 50s and the 60s, when it all began. And so I think in that way, his work is a little bit different than all the other filmmakers that say came along after him. And not only did he record them, but he did so with an innocence and a purity as you saw in the film, those skits, that was all horseplay, of course. We really had a good time, but it was so innocent, don't you think? And you recorded surfing in the golden years, in the golden years, and for that I think we all owe Bud Browne a great debt. So let's all say thank you to Bud Browne.
I always broke my boards, so I had to bum boards, from people. So I bummed Doyle's board. So Doyle let me use his board, and I went out surfing at Waimea, and this guy paddled out and said, "Hey, Doyle wants his board back." So I said, "Okay." So what was I going to do now? So I went out on the point and I harassed Bud. "Hey, Bud, your helper's here. Kimo, you better behave yourself now." And, I kicked what they call that, the transom or something. Yeah, I kick it, and then he'd get mad at me. But he was such a nice guy that, he would never remain mad at you. He was a very unique person. I just want to tell you folks that my family been surfing 100 years, and that we lost one of our own, that my first cousin, Fred Hollinger, he broke his neck at Sandy Beach, and they put him on life support, and I went in and saw him, and he gave me a smile, one surfer to another surfer. Thank you very much.
Well, this is a classic group up here, and I have to say I'm the oldest, so I want them to respect me. One of the things about Bud that's really classic is he was really funny, and in his own way. And in the mid-90s, Bud decided to make a film called Surfing the 50s, and he had John Kelly and myself come over to help him with it. And he was doing the same thing he was doing back in the 60s. He'd get a big box, and he'd have masking tape, and he'd had his scissors, and he would take the film on a viewer. He had a viewer there, and he'd take the film, and he'd cut the film, and every once in a while there'd be a shot of me, and I'd say, "Hey, Bud, that's a pretty good wave," and the next thing I'd know it'd be in the edit box. But he was just really a good person and a good friend, and Bud and I became very close. John Weiser and I just started working with Bud back in 1960, and we produced 4 films together where we decided that Bud had a hard time doing the narration and getting the music and everything else on his own. He used to take these films, and he'd first of all get the tape recorder that had the music. He'd get that synced. Then he'd go down to get the film loaded up on the projector. He'd go down the aisle to get the projector, and he'd load the film on the projector. And then he'd go back up and he'd get the mic and he'd start to do the narrating. And Bud was a classic guy, but not the most charismatic, dynamic narrator that you ever heard. And he'd get up there and he'd start to narrate this film, and all of a sudden he'd notice that the film reel that was on the projector was coming loose, and the film was rolling down the aisle. And in those days, the surfers were just total grimmies and totally impolite. And if anything went wrong, they'd start yelling and screaming and throwing paper gliders and other things. And here's Bud running down the aisle to get the reel that's rolling down the aisle, and then he'd get the reel put up on the thing, and then he'd go back up to the stage, and the music would be off sync. It was a real struggle. So John Weiser and I in 1960 decided that maybe we could help Bud. And we would get John Weiser worked at K-Poi at the radio station, and he decided that we could make a soundtrack for him. And we started, and we'd add a little humor in there, and some of the scenes that we had humor that John and I worked with Bud were like the guy getting the board stealing act and a few other things that they were there. They still went and going surfing, but we had so much fun, Bud and I. And it was so much fun to get together with Bud and do that editing and the script and working with the script with him and everything else in 1994, when Bud was, I think, 75 or so, and I was maybe 63 or something. Bud was about 13 or 17 years older than me, and we were doing the same exact thing we had been doing in the 60s, and here we were doing it again. And then we decided to go down to the wedge and body surf. We went down to the wedge and body surfed, and Bud was hooting and everything else, and it was so much fun. And I just loved the guy, and he was just a wonderful person, and there is no one else to replace Bud Browne. Bud Browne, and I have to tell you, Going Surfing, in my opinion, was the best surf film ever made, and I haven't seen anything equal, but I haven't seen too many lately. Thank you.
Hi folks, I'd like to say that I was a young Grammy learning to surf in the 50s when these gentlemen were coming over surfing Great Makaha, a lot of California guys, but here in Hawaii we had some people like George Downing, Russ Takaki, Clarence Maki, Wally Floyd, these guys that I, because my dad was a surfer, my mom was a waterwoman, was lucky enough to have these guys who were just coming to surf the North Shore and were already well-established surfers in their own right, being patient enough with me, who could get myself into trouble easy back then. They would show me the lineup and give me encouragement. And Jose, of course, Peter knows this, was famous for getting guys to take off with him. Oh, it's cool, Chuck. Oh, there's a good wave. Are you sure, Jose? Yeah. But the sense of humor back then amongst surfers was great, and it shows up in a lot of Bud's old movies. And when I was 14 or 15, and I could get a ride in to see some of these movies, Bruce Brown, Bud's movies, Grant Roloff, John Severson's movies, that it was magic. We'd have bottle caps, we'd be flipping at the screen. We were pretty encouraging. But I'd just like to say that Bud, because he knew my mom and dad, he would stay out at my folks' house now and then, and I got to talk to him when I was 12, 14 years old, and he's taciturn. He's a Gary Cooper kind of guy. He's mostly a quiet guy, but if you have some realization of some of the stuff that he had done, like the wetsuit inventions, and how inventive of a guy he was, how really intelligent of a guy he was, and if you could see a way to get in edgewise, that it was great to have a conversation with him, because he really was a well-rounded, a very gentlemanly guy, like Peter and Reno say, but also very intelligent and highly athletic guy. He used to use a rubber mat to go swim out to monster days, and I believe he got, because the ocean is that way, you think, oh, it's nice, you're keeping your eye on the surfers, and all of a sudden you don't notice there's a closeout set coming in. Oh, gotta pay the price. But Bud was in shape because guys like Flippy Hoffman, who were divers, a lot of surfers were divers back then, and because we didn't wear leashes and we swam a lot, we dove, surfers weren't rich people back then, so a lot of surfers were divers and fishermen like my dad, and it was a good way to bring food back to the table. I hate to really go into detail about what surfers would eat back then, just to have some energy to be able to go surfing the next day. But their wind, I guess, is what I'm getting at here, is that Bud was an example of people like Flippy and Flippy Hoffman, Jose Angel, Buzzy Trent. Most of us were divers back then, but the kind when people like Jose would go out the pipeline to to be able to take the wipeouts, was just showing that we recognize that if you, which a lot of people, I'm sorry to say nowadays, don't take consideration of, is that when you're going to surf on a bigger wave, like Brian Calvana says, that if you can't take the wipeout, you really shouldn't be going out there. This lesson is lost on a lot of people nowadays that are more concerned with either getting their picture taken or, trying to look good to their girlfriends. And so luckily people like Brad Calon, again, have brought the jet ski around. So, the life-saving business is a lot more adept nowadays than it was back then. But, back then we looked out for each other a lot more too, like people like Bud and like you, Peter, and Ricky and Kimo, these people that I was lucky enough. I'm not thankful enough nowadays, and every once in a while I go, whoa, you were raised where, you had who for friends, like your mom and dad knew who, and who clapped you on the back, when you're in trouble and told you better straighten up. Guys like Grigg, Peter, Ricky, Kimo. So I feel that nowadays that I have a couple of kids that are good surfers. For me, that it's very easy to try to pass on what I feel is valuable, and I'm humble enough to be able to listen to these kids nowadays. If they tell me, you should compliment us a little bit more. Don't be such a sour old puss, Any ways out there are meant for you, How about sharing a little bit? So I find that, being humbled in the water now and then by these guys like Reno, he was a little bit younger than I when he was growing up, and seeing some of the stuff that these guys like Reno and Jeff Hackman and Jerry did, that it made me feel very, very lucky to be part of this surfing world. Thank you.
Questions. We could answer any questions that you might have. This is a real good group. I want to say that the 70s were a great time for surfing because that's when the shortboard came in, and that's when the surfing really took off. That's when I think we were kind of, before the 70s, we were all kind of obsolete, It was unbelievable what happened in the 70s. And Reno, that was a real good group of surfers. And the one thing I have to say about Jock and Reno and Barry Cunningham and Jeff Hackman and all those guys, they were really, really good, but they didn't snake surfers, They were never, I can't remember in all the time I've been out in the lineup with them that I ever was snaked by anybody like these guys. And that's really good. And that's one thing that I think is really important in surfing, is that there be a gentleman attitude, that the guy that's on the inside and the furthest out, he gets the wave and you don't go taking off on top of him and everything else. And that's what the 70s surfers represented for me. And I really enjoyed this movie. I saw it when it first came out. Bud had two versions. The first version he had was Going Surfing, and then he had the Going Surfing New. The first Going Surfing was with Hebs McClellan doing it. And most of the footage was the same. But then Grigg came in. Grigg McGilvery is a champion producer of film, and he helped Bud with the Going Surfing New that you saw tonight. And I have to say, that film is just excellent. The editing, everything about it was just a really beautiful movie, and I'm so happy to see it again. Any questions?
I have a question. You can ask questions?
Sure.
What inspired each of you to finally say, I think I can do this. I think I can get out there and beat that wave?
The older guys.
Older guys.
The guys that came first before us, like Duke Theatre, the guys that came before.
But when you first went out there, I mean, that's got to be awesome to get out there and to get on that wave. I just can't imagine. What was your awe-inspiring moment that said, I can do this, I can beat this?
Everybody, that's my wife. I guess I was just born into surfing.
Born with it, yes.
But I want to apologize for when I was younger. I was a big-time hog.
Never will.
But now that I'm old, I'm lucky to catch 3 waves, and I'm so thankful for those 3 waves.
What do you think the leash has done to surfing?
Oh boy, you should give me the mic on that one. The leash ruins surfing. Before we had the leash, Let me just explain, just so you can get a feel for it. Before we had the leash, when we were in the lineup, we sat next to each other. You know, it was like a line of surfers sitting in the water next to each other. There was nobody in front of us. You know, there was nobody in our way sitting there in front of us. Because if they were, they'd be swimming, you know. But with the leash, these guys, they're underneath you. A wave comes, they just bail off, and the board goes up in the air and comes back. They grab the board. They try to get every wave in the ocean. It caused nothing but wave hogs. And in my opinion, surfing went totally downhill with the leash.
Question in the back there?
Yes, about 99% of all these old movies, which are great, all the big conditions from Lonnie's, Haleiwa, Sunset, and Waimea, 99% of the shots, rarely do you see a guy get a wave to himself. And my question was, what was the etiquette? Did you guys get ticked off when 4 of you, 5 of you, 10 of you are going down Waimea and half you got wiped out by each other? You know, you said so-and-so didn't snake so-and-so, but rarely do you see you guys get waves to yourself. Were you all friends and it's just like, that's the way it goes? Or did you guys, did it get aggressive?
Well, I've got the mic, so let me try with that one. What was the etiquette? I would say there wasn't really much etiquette because there wasn't a need for it. We were all just caring for each other. It was the most wonderful feeling to have someone out with you, you know, because that guy was going to save your life and vice versa. And that happened several times. So Jose Angel, I can remember that saving my life at Waimea once, and I returned the favor on Kauai once for him. And you know, there was a camaraderie that transcended etiquette. In other words, you didn't need etiquette. You just loved each other.
That's awesome.
And like Peter said, you know, the crowds have gradually changed that, and the leash, of course, contributed to that, and now with the stand-ups, it's even worse yet. but I wanted to say one thing. I think for all of us here, not just tonight, but all of us who surf, I think the most inspiring thing about the ocean is the ocean itself. The question was asked, what inspired you? It was the ocean, it was the beauty of the ocean. It just pulls you in, it seduces you, it mystifies you, it romances you, you fall in love with it, and it loves you back.
I just wanted to add to that, the comment about whether or not, you know, there are multiple people in the water. I think my take on that is that most of the guys who were venturing out into the bigger waves, we were all familiar with. And we were all familiar with each other's level of ability. So there's a certain sense of confidence that you had, even with a group of guys that you knew may or may not take off on the same wave with you. It was just, you know, there's always a certain amount of risk involved in surfing bigger waves anyway, but still, it's not anything compared to, you know, what you see out nowadays that we were talking about. There's, you know, just huge, you know, very crowded conditions with people of questionable ability that, you know, you don't really want to be near that person if they are behind you or in front of you. I mean, I'm kind of chuckling inside myself because, you know, we didn't snake. One of the comments is we didn't snake each other. I mean, Jerry and I grew up together, surfing town and then country in a lot of ways. And Jerry made an art of snaking people. I mean, he may not appreciate that he's not here. Well, that's too bad. But anyway, he made an art of it to the point where if you were good enough to stand close enough to catch the same wave, you better be able to be good enough to either go behind him, around him, and actually be able to share the wave without hurting each other. So the other comment I wanted to make is, the leash came along, and it was something that whether or not it completely ruined surfing, I'm certain that it took away the fact that if you wiped out pre-leash days, you swam. Sometimes it was a short swim, sometimes it was, but often it was a long swim. And you see a lot, of course, a lot less people paying the penalty of having to swim because they're attached to their board now. So, for better or for worse, the leashes here, I don't think everybody's going to stop using them. Anyway, I think Peter's got a leash on his board too. Come on, Peter. Huh?
I have a leash on my dog.
He has a leash on his dog.
One thing that was really kind of fun, I was out there, and I know that the guys out there were saying, when is this guy going to get out of this water? When is this guy going to leave us alone? But I was out there with my big yellow board and everything, and one time this guy paddled out to me and he said, look, I have no leash, and he was real proud of the fact he wasn't wearing a leash. And I said, well, good deal. I said, that's great. He said, you see that thing outside? He says, you and I are going to both be swimming. The next thing you know, this big wave came and we're both swimming, and I noticed he had his leash when he went back out. But surfing is so much fun, and I think one of the things that really I have always enjoyed was the people I got to know, the camaraderie we had in the lineup, and the laughs we had. We would give each other really a bad time. And I'll remember all of us sitting out there with Ken Bradshaw, and he was going with Lane Beachley. And we used to say to him, he says, how does it feel, Ken, to be going out with a girl that's a better surfer than you are? Ken had a real ego, and that didn't go over too well.
Yeah, I'd like to say I agree with Reno about back in the little bit older days that the guys would take off with each other. They mostly knew each other. There wasn't hundreds of thousands of surfers, and you realize how the other guy rode. Occasionally there'd be kooks out there that would take off on the shoulder, but he got the facts of life explained to him, shall we say. Usually within short order. There wasn't any subterfuge, so to speak, but. Like Reno says, that when like you're riding a pipe with somebody else, or say all on a balls, and the guy that's riding the wave with you, that you could ride really close to him because you know pretty much what he was going to do, not everything, but you had a good instinct for that. But before the leash, most surfers were good watermen. Could hold their breath for a long time, and they're in really good shape. But the leash helps in certain areas where you might not otherwise go to surf, like where there's a lot of rocks. Honolulu Bay, we surf. Yeah. There's a lot of places where the leash helps, but you don't want to let it be so much of a crutch that if you break it, that you're in really bad trouble. My son Gavin surfs Waimea Bay a bunch nowadays, and he was out there a year or two ago. A big set came in. He was the only guy that made it over, and like other 25 guys behind him just got mowed. And he says that, when the wave passed, there's like half the guys are there screaming for the jet ski. Okay, and that not only puts a bad tax on the lifeguards, but it also, it interferes with the other guys in the water. And so it actually is a real danger. So for the most part, I'm going to have to agree with Peter that. I won't go as far as say that the leash ruins surfing for a youngster, say, who's surfing by themselves. A leash can be a help, but general rule of thumb is, you be logical. Try not to, depend on the leash because they can break. The design of them sometimes is faulty, where the strengthener going into the leg part of the leash can have a sharp edge on it. You make too many of them, and the leash can break real easy. A brand new leash. So you want to try to have a sense of camaraderie, because if you break your leash and you piss the other guy off, guess what? He's not going to help you.
Flippy Hoffman came out one day at Waimea. This was in the early days, before the leash really became, and he said, look what I've got. And he had this long leash that was stuck to his foot. It was tied around his foot, and it was this big leash going out to the board, and Flippy Hoffman had these boards that were just humongous, 12-foot, 13-foot, heavy stringers. They must have weighed about 60, 70 pounds, And he had this leash, and I got a wave, and I was coming back out, and I saw this wave. I saw Flippy fall off this wave, and the board went ahead of him, and you saw this guy shooting out of the whitewater, the board, and with his foot on his leash. It was the worst wipeout I've ever seen in my life. He was underwater so long. It took him almost halfway to the beach. His foot was a foot longer than it was before. It was, without a doubt, the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. Every time I think of it, and every time I think of it, I just start laughing, you know, and then flipping his leash.
I think the young kids today are terrific. I love to watch them guys surf. They've taken it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's progressed, and I take my hat off to them.
Well, I want to thank this stellar group of guys who are still looking good. And what I want to say is that whatever your passion is in life, you be it dance or art, surfing, that you should always know your craft and where it comes from and the shoulders that we build upon. And I think that is what is of greatest value to the things that Bud has left behind, and the knowledge that these men impart to us is that they are reminding us of where we come from and where we're going. And you are teaching us our craft. And this treasure that Bud has given us reminds us of that. And I hope that it will continue to be passed on. And there were some really great words said tonight. And thank you. Thank you all for coming.